Kamma is one of the most frequently mentioned yet deeply misunderstood teachings in Buddhism. In popular culture, it is often reduced to a simplistic slogan. What goes around comes around. While catchy, this idea quietly transforms Kamma into a form of cosmic justice, a hidden force that rewards good people and punishes bad ones. This misunderstanding turns Kamma into fate, destiny, or even divine judgment, precisely what the Buddha did not teach. To truly decipher Kamma, we must first dismantle these assumptions and return to its original meaning in the Pali Canon. The word Kamma simply means action, but in the Buddha's teaching it refers specifically to intentional action, cetana. This distinction is crucial. Not everything that happens to us is Kamma, and not every action produces Kamma. A stone falling from a roof, a sudden illness, or being born into a particular environment are not moral judgments handed down by the universe. They arise from countless physical, biological, and environmental conditions. Kamma begins at a much subtler level, the intention behind what we think, say, and do. It is not the action itself that carries ethical weight, but the mental impulse that drives it. Because this nuance is often missed, Kamma is frequently mistaken for fatalism. People may say, "This is my karma, I must accept it," implying that life is pre-written and unchangeable. The Buddha rejected this view explicitly. If everything were fixed by past karma, there would be no meaningful path of practice, no freedom, and no possibility of liberation. Instead, karma is dynamic and alive, continuously shaped by present intention. The past influences the present, but it does not imprison it. At every moment, a new response is possible. Another widespread misunderstanding is the idea that everything is karma. This belief creates guilt, fear, and moral confusion. It suggests that every misfortune must be deserved and that every success must be earned through past deeds. The Buddha never taught such moral absolutism. He emphasized that experience arises from multiple causes and conditions, paccaya, of which Kamma is only one. Weather, biology, social systems, and random events all play a role. Kamma is not a universal explanation for everything that happens. It explains how intentional mental actions condition future experience. Equally misleading is the modern expectation of instant karmic results. When people act unethically and do not suffer immediately, or act kindly and do not receive instant rewards, they assume Kamma has failed. This expectation treats Kamma like a transactional system with immediate payback. In reality, Kamma does not operate on human timelines or moral expectations. Its results may arise much later, subtly shaping tendencies, perceptions, and reactions rather than appearing as dramatic external events. Most importantly, Kamma is not governed by a god, a cosmic judge, or an invisible accountant keeping score. It functions impersonally, like gravity or fire. When conditions are present, results follow, not because someone wills them, but because that is the nature of causality. There is no moral authority deciding outcomes, only the lawful unfolding of cause and effect. Understanding Kamma in this original sense is not meant to inspire fear or blind belief. It is meant to awaken responsibility and clarity. When we see that intention matters, that our mental states shape our future experience, Kamma becomes not a threat but an invitation. It points not to destiny, but to possibility, the possibility of understanding how suffering is created, moment by moment, and how it can also come to an end. To understand Kamma more deeply, we must look closely at how it actually functions in lived experience. The Buddha described Kamma not as an external force acting upon us, but as an internal process unfolding moment by moment through intention. At the heart of Kamma lies cetana, the mental impulse that inclines the mind toward acting, speaking, or even simply thinking in a particular way. Without intention there is no Kamma. A movement of the body without volition, a sound spoken absent-mindedly, or a thought that arises and fades without grasping carries little or no karmic weight. It is the intentional direction of the mind that sets Kamma in motion. Kamma operates through three primary channels: bodily action, verbal action, and mental action. While physical and verbal actions are the most visible, the Buddha emphasized that mental kamma is the most subtle and powerful. Long before a word is spoken or a deed is done, an intention has already formed in the mind. This intention conditions perception, selects what we focus on, and shapes how we interpret the world. Over time, repeated intentions carve grooves in the mind, making certain reactions feel natural and others almost impossible. In this way, Kamma gradually constructs what we call personality, character, and even worldview. Importantly, Kamma is not something stored or accumulated like a substance waiting to be released. There is no hidden vault of past deeds inside the mind. Kamma is a process, a pattern of conditioning. Each intentional act leaves a trace not as a record, but as a tendency. Just as a path becomes clearer each time it is walked, certain mental habits become stronger the more they are repeated. Anger conditions future anger, generosity conditions future generosity, and mindfulness conditions clarity and restraint. The result of Kamma is not fate, but momentum. This helps explain why Kamma shapes experience from the inside out. Two people may encounter the same situation, yet experience it in completely different ways. One meets criticism with defensiveness and pain, another with reflection and calm. The external event is identical, but the internal conditioning is not. Kamma does not merely influence what happens to us, it influences how we meet what happens. Much of what we call suffering arises not from events themselves, but from the habitual intentions that color our response. Because Kamma is intention-based, it is also deeply ethical. Actions rooted in greed, aversion, and delusion tend to agitate the mind, narrowing perception and reinforcing dissatisfaction. Actions rooted in generosity, kindness, and wisdom tend to calm the mind, widen awareness, and support clarity. The Buddha did not present this as a moral command imposed from outside, but as an observable law of experience. When the mind acts from confusion, it experiences confusion. When it acts from understanding, it experiences ease. Crucially, Kamma is being formed now. Each moment of intention is a new seed, shaping the next moment and the next. This means that no one is merely a victim of past actions. While past Kamma influences present conditions, present intention determines how those conditions are used. In this way, Kamma reveals a profound truth: freedom does not lie in controlling the world, but in understanding and transforming the intentions through which we relate to it. To fully grasp Kamma, it must be seen through the lens of Paṭiccasamuppāda, or dependent origination, the Buddha's central teaching on how suffering arises and ceases. When Kamma is isolated from this framework, it easily slips into the idea of a hidden agent, someone who performs actions, owns them, and later receives their results. Dependent origination dissolves this assumption entirely. It reveals a world in which phenomena arise not because of a controller or a soul, but because conditions are present. When conditions change, results change. Nothing stands apart as a permanent doer or receiver. In this teaching, Kamma is not an independent force but one link in a chain of conditioned processes. Ignorance, avijja, gives rise to volitional formations, sakkara, which include intentional actions of body, speech, and mind. These formations condition consciousness, which in turn conditions experience. Nowhere in this sequence does the Buddha insert a self that commands the process. There is intention, but no intender, action, but no actor in the metaphysical sense. What we call I act is simply a convenient label for a complex flow of mental and physical events arising together. This is why Buddhism can speak of moral responsibility without asserting an eternal soul. Kamma functions not because someone owns it, but because patterns condition further patterns. A flame lights another flame without anything being transferred. In the same way, intention conditions future experience without requiring a substance to move from past to present. The idea of my Kamma is a practical convention, not an ultimate truth. It helps communication, but it should not be mistaken for a metaphysical fact. Seen this way, Kamma is inseparable from ignorance and wisdom. When actions arise from not understanding impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self, they reinforce the cycle of becoming. They propel the mind into future reactions, future identities, future suffering. When understanding begins to replace ignorance, the quality of intention changes. Actions become less compulsive, less driven by craving and aversion. Kamma weakens not because it is destroyed, but because the conditions that sustain it are no longer fed. This perspective also clarifies rebirth without invoking a soul. What continues is not a self, but a process. Just as one moment of consciousness conditions the next within this life, the final moments of consciousness condition the arising of a new stream under suitable conditions. Continuity exists without identity. Responsibility exists without ownership. Cause and effect operate without a judge. Understanding Kamma with independent origination is profoundly liberating. It removes both guilt and pride. There is no permanent me to blame or glorify, only a process to be understood. Suffering is not a personal failure, and awakening is not a personal achievement. Both arise from conditions. When ignorance conditions intention, suffering follows. When wisdom conditions intention, freedom begins to appear. In this way, Kamma is no longer a burden carried by a self, but a natural law that can be known, observed, and ultimately transcended. One of the greatest sources of confusion about Kamma arises from the expectation that cause and effect should unfold in a simple, linear way. Many people assume that a good action must quickly produce a pleasant result, and a harmful action must soon bring suffering. When this does not happen, doubt appears, and Kamma is dismissed as unfair or unreal. The Buddha, however, never described Kamma as a straight line from action to result. He described it as a complex web, where countless conditions intersect, support, obstruct, or delay one another. Kamma ripens only when appropriate conditions are present. An intention may be formed today, but its result may appear much later, or manifest subtly rather than dramatically. Sometimes it influences the tone of the mind, the kind of situations we are drawn into, or the way we interpret events rather than producing a clear external consequence. This is why it is impossible to look at someone's current circumstances and accurately judge their past actions. Apparent success or failure in life tells us very little about ethical causes. Because visible outcomes are shaped by many non-karmic factors such as social systems, physical health, education, and chance. This complexity explains a question that has troubled people for centuries. Why do kind people suffer? And why do harmful people sometimes seem to prosper? From the perspective of Kamma, this is not a contradiction. Old karmic tendencies may be ripening while new ones are being formed. Beneficial intentions may not yet have the conditions to bear fruit, while unwholesome ones may be temporarily supported by favorable circumstances. Kamma does not operate to satisfy our sense of moral drama. It operates impersonally, responding only to conditions, not to expectations of fairness. Another important aspect of nonlinearity is that Kamma is not erased or guaranteed by a single action. A moment of generosity does not cancel years of habitual greed, nor does a single unwholesome act define a person's entire future. The mind is shaped by repeated patterns, not isolated moments. This is why practice emphasizes continuity and cultivation rather than perfection. Gradual change matters more than dramatic gestures. Present conditions also play a decisive role in how Kamma manifests. Even strong past tendencies can be weakened or overridden when mindfulness and wisdom are present. Likewise, wholesome tendencies can be obstructed by confusion, distraction, or harmful environments. Kamma does not function in isolation from the present moment, it expresses itself through it. Each moment becomes a meeting point where past conditioning and present awareness intersect. Seeing Kamma as complex and uncertain protects the teaching from becoming cruel or judgmental. It prevents us from blaming people for their suffering or congratulating ourselves for our good fortune. Instead, it encourages humility and careful observation. The Buddha's teaching does not ask us to calculate karmic outcomes or predict future results. It asks us to understand the quality of intention now, because this is the only place where Kamma is actually being formed. In this way, uncertainty is not a flaw in the teaching. It is a reminder that liberation does not come from controlling results, but from understanding causes. The Buddha's teaching on Kamma does not end with explaining how cause and effect operate. It points beyond Kamma to the possibility of freedom. This is a crucial distinction. The goal of the path is not to accumulate good Kamma in the hope of better outcomes, but to understand the very process by which Kamma is created and, through that understanding, bring it to an end. As long as actions arise from craving, aversion, and ignorance, Kamma continues to shape experience and bind the mind to repeated patterns of becoming. When these roots are seen clearly, their grip begins to loosen. Mindfulness plays a central role in this transformation. When the mind is unobserved, intentions arise automatically, driven by habit. Reaction follows reaction, and Kamma flows on unnoticed. With mindfulness, intention becomes visible. One begins to see the moment where a thought inclines toward grasping, resisting, or identifying. In that moment of seeing, a new possibility appears, the possibility of not reacting. This pause does not suppress intention, it understands it. And understanding weakens the compulsion to act it out. Wisdom, panna, deepens this process by revealing the true nature of experience. When impermanence is seen directly, craving loses its urgency. When unsatisfactoriness is understood, the mind stops seeking lasting security in conditions that cannot provide it. When non-self is realized, the sense of, I am the doer, begins to dissolve. Action still occurs, but it is no longer driven by the need to defend, enhance, or perpetuate a self. Such action is described as non-karmic, not because nothing happens, but because it leaves no residue of clinging. Ethical conduct, sila, supports this freedom by calming the mind and reducing remorse and conflict. A mind not burdened by harm becomes more capable of clarity and insight. Concentration, samadhi, stabilizes attention, allowing intention to be seen with precision. Together, these qualities do not perfect Kamma. They undermine the conditions that generate it. This is why the Buddha spoke of the end of Kamma as synonymous with liberation. Nibbana is not the reward for good Kamma, nor is it the result of a final, perfect action. It is the cessation of compulsive action rooted in ignorance. When intention no longer feeds becoming, the chain of cause and effect that sustains suffering falls silent. What remains is not blankness, but a freedom that is not dependent on conditions. Seen in this light, Kamma is not a doctrine meant to bind us to endless self-improvement or moral anxiety. It is a diagnostic tool, revealing how suffering is constructed and how it can cease. The Buddha's teaching invites us not to fear Kamma, nor to worship it, but to understand it so thoroughly that it no longer governs our lives. In that understanding lies the deepest form of freedom, a freedom not from action, but from bondage to action itself.